US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country, saying the move would spur growth in the American economy.
Germany, France, and Denmark just dealt a crushing blow to the $219.5 billion US auto industry with tariffs and bans that are threatening to wipe out American brands. How did things go so wrong for US automakers? Chancellor Olaf Scholz's reaction to the new tariffs from the United States was swift and sharp. He didn't hold back, calling the US tariffs on European-made cars fundamentally wrong. Germany, as Europe's largest economy, wasn't about to take this lying down. The decision wasn't just a political stance, it was a calculated and strategic move aimed at undermining the US's influence in the electric vehicle market. Germany knew that historically the US had led the way in automotive innovation, but this new economic war was about to change all of that. With Germany's deep economic roots, it was clear that the country's response would have serious implications for the US auto industry.
I deeply regret the US decision to impose tariffs on EU automotive exports. Tariffs are taxes, bad for businesses, worse for consumers in the US and the EU. The EU will continue to seek negotiated solutions while safeguarding its economic interests.
The first major blow came when Germany's company imposed a ban on American electric vehicles from government contracts. This wasn't a mere inconvenience for companies like Tesla, Ford, and General Motors. It was a direct assault on their profitability. As if that wasn't enough, subsidies from US-made electric vehicles were slashed, making it more expensive for European buyers to choose American cars. The German government made it clear that they weren't going to sit idly by while the US restructured global markets to its advantage. The kill order issued by Berlin wasn't just a slap in the face, it was a strategic decimation of American brands, one of the world's most lucrative automotive markets.
All eyes are on Greenland as Vice President J.D. Vance and an American delegation prepare for a scaled-back trip to the territory tomorrow. Greenlanders and Denmark have made it abundantly clear how they feel about this trip, and it's not good.
When France entered the fray, it wasn't just a continuation of the economic battle, it was a full-blown escalation. The French government wasted no time in announcing a 25% tariff on all automotive imports from the United States. This wasn't a vague threat, it was a concrete move that immediately crippled American automakers. Tesla, Ford, and General Motors were all caught in the crossfire, with their operations in Europe facing an existential threat. France's decision to block American-made electric vehicles was devastating for these brands, especially given that France had been one of the largest European markets for US vehicles. It was no longer a matter of friendly trade agreements. France was sending a clear message that American EVs were no longer welcome on French soil.
We know the Vances are not invited to Greenland. We know leaders there have been clear that this territory is not up for grabs. What are your thoughts on the White House sending, the VP to the territory?
But that wasn't all. French President Emmanuel Macron didn't just stop at tariffs. He took a step further by allying with Renault and Stellantis, two of Europe's largest automakers. France began redirecting all federal and municipal contracts to these homegrown manufacturers. To make matters worse for US automakers, the French government promised massive subsidies and public investments to ensure that European-made electric vehicles completely replaced American imports on French roads. The narrative here was no longer about fair trade. It was about protecting European jobs and preserving economic independence from foreign powers. This narrative spread like wildfire, framing American electric vehicles as a threat to France's future.
The car industry is king, and that key sector looks set to face a harsh new reality soon.
European cars are soon set to become much more expensive in the US.
Denmark, a smaller player in the European automotive market, took a much more personal approach in its retaliation against the US. While Germany and France focused on broad economic measures, Denmark zeroed in on Tesla and its controversial CEO, Elon Musk. The Danish government's first move was to blacklist Tesla, officially removing the company from several key government programs. But this wasn't just about business, it was a deliberate attack on Musk himself. The Danish Financial Supervisory Authority announced that two of Denmark's largest pension funds would immediately divest from Tesla due to what they described as the company's unethical labor practices and Musk's political entanglements. The decision wasn't only about financial concerns, it was also about sending a message. Tesla and by extension Musk had become a political lightning rod in Europe. Denmark's actions didn't stop with pension funds. The government also decided to slash consumer rebates for electric vehicles, specifically targeting American-made brands. Under the new regulations, any vehicle manufactured by an American automaker would no longer be eligible for the country's popular electric vehicle rebate programs. The coordinated moves by Germany, France, and Denmark didn't just hurt the reputation of American automakers, they triggered an economic catastrophe. By the time all the tariffs, blacklists, and policy changes were put into effect, the US auto industry was staring down the barrel of a $219.5 billion loss in exports. This wasn't just a minor setback, it was an existential crisis for companies like General Motors, Ford, and Tesla. These companies had relied heavily on Europe for their revenue streams, with over $110 billion in vehicle exports to the continent in the previous year alone. But with the new 25% tariffs on US-made vehicles, cancelled government contracts, and slashed consumer rebates, the American presence in Europe was effectively wiped out. The economic fallout was immediate. General Motors, for example, reported a projected revenue loss of $14 billion, while Ford predicted a $6 billion hit. Tesla, which had once been the golden child of the EV world, saw its market valuation plummet, with European pension funds dumping their shares. The consequences weren't limited to the corporate giants. In states like Michigan and Ohio, factories began to close, and layoffs started to hit the auto industry hard. Small businesses that relied on the automotive supply chain were also affected, with many facing bankruptcy. This domino effect created panic throughout the industry. President Trump's economic strategy, known as his America First policy, was built on a foundation of protectionism, particularly targeting foreign-made goods. His goal was clear: bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, especially in industries that had seen jobs outsourced overseas. One of his most controversial moves was the imposition of a 25% tariff on European automobiles and auto parts. This decision wasn't just aimed at levying higher taxes on foreign goods. It was a direct attack on the key European automotive players, Germany, France, and Denmark. Trump's rationale for these tariffs was simple: the US was being taken advantage of, and the tariffs would level the playing field. However, this strategy quickly spiraled out of control, leading to consequences that no one could have anticipated. For US automakers, this tariff war was disastrous. The tariffs on imported vehicles and auto parts from Europe immediately drove up production costs. Companies like Ford, General Motors, and Tesla had long depended on free trade with European nations for essential components like advanced electronics, batteries, and transmissions. These tariffs made it significantly more expensive for US automakers to manufacture cars. To absorb these extra costs, automakers had no choice but to raise prices for consumers. Ford executives warned that some of their most affordable models could see price hikes of up to $6,000 per car. These price increases came at a time when consumers were already feeling the pressure of inflation, making the cars even less affordable. As a result, demand for US-made vehicles began to drop, and the financial strain on American automakers started to grow rapidly. The fallout from Trump's protectionist policies wasn't just limited to Europe. Across the border, Canada, traditionally one of US's closest trade allies, joined the fray with its counterstrike against American-made vehicles. In March 2025, the Canadian government unveiled a $10,000 special tariff on all Tesla vehicles imported into the country. This was a direct response to the tariffs the US had imposed on European-made vehicles and components. But Canada's actions didn't stop there. The government also introduced a new rebate program that heavily favored local manufacturers, offering significant incentives for consumers to buy Canadian-made electric vehicles. This strategic move effectively made American electric cars, particularly Teslas, much more expensive for Canadian buyers. What made Canada's move particularly damaging to Tesla was its targeted exclusion of American-made vehicles from the country's green technology subsidies. These subsidies were a key part of the Canadian government's plan to push for a cleaner, greener future, and Tesla had long been one of the primary beneficiaries. But under the new policy, Tesla found itself stripped of the eligibility for these grants, leaving the company to face a tough decision: either raise prices even higher or absorb the losses. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.